The Pharisees were at various times a political party, a social movement, and a school of thought in the Holy Land during the time of Second Temple Judaism. After the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, Pharisaic beliefs became the foundational, liturgical and ritualistic basis for Rabbinic Judaism. Conflicts between Pharisees and Sadducees took place in the context of much broader and long-standing social and religious conflicts among Jews, dating back to the time of slavery in Egypt and exacerbated by the Roman conquest. Another conflict was cultural, between those who favored Hellenization and those who resisted it. A third was juridico-religious, between those who emphasized the importance of the Second Temple with its rites and services, and those who emphasized the importance of other Mosaic laws. A fourth point of conflict, specifically religious, involved different interpretations of the Torah and how to apply it to current Jewish life, with Sadducees recognizing only the written Torah and rejecting doctrines such as the oral Torah, the prophets, the writings, and the resurrection of the dead. Josephus, himself a Pharisee, estimated the total Pharisee population prior to the fall of the Second Temple to be around 6,000. Josephus claimed that Pharisees received the full support and goodwill of the common people, apparently in contrast to the more elite Sadducees, who were the upper class. Pharisees claimed Mosaic authority for their interpretation of Jewish laws, while Sadducees represented the authority of the priestly privileges and prerogatives established since the days of Solomon, when Zadok, their ancestor, officiated as high priest. The phrase, common people, in Josephus suggests that most Jews were just Jewish people, distinguishing them from the main liturgical groups outside of Jewish history and writings. Pharisees have been made notable by references in the New Testament to conflicts with John the Baptist and with Jesus. There are also several references in the New Testament to the Apostle Paul being a Pharisee. The relationship between early Christianity and Pharisees was not always hostile, however. E.g., Gamaliel, is often cited as a Pharisaic leader who was sympathetic to Christians. Christian tradition draws attention to the Pharisees. Etymology: Pharisee is derived from ancient Greek pharisaios, from Aramaic perisa, plural perisaia, meaning set apart, separated, related to Hebrew paris, plural perusum, the Carl passive participle of the verb paris. History: the deportation and exile of an unknown number of Jews of the ancient kingdom of Judah to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar II, starting with the first deportation in 597 BC and continuing after the fall of Jerusalem and destruction of the Temple in 587 BC, resulted in dramatic changes to Jewish culture and religion. During the 70-year exile in Babylon, Jewish houses of assembly and houses of prayer were the primary meeting places for prayer, and the house of study was the counterpart for the synagogue. In 539 BC the Persians conquered Babylon, and in 537 BC Cyrus the Great allowed Jews to return to Judea and rebuild the temple. He did not, however, allow the restoration of the Judean monarchy, which left the Judean priests as the dominant authority. Without the constraining power of the monarchy, the authority of the temple in civic life was amplified. It was around this time that the Sadducee party emerged as the party of priests and allied elites. However, the Second Temple, which was completed in 515 BCE, had been constructed under the auspices of a foreign power, and there were lingering questions about its legitimacy. This provided the condition for the development of various sects or schools of thought, each of which claimed exclusive authority to represent Judaism, and which typically shunned social intercourse, especially marriage, with members of other sects. In the same period, the Council of Sages known as the Sanhedrin may have codified and canonized the Hebrew Bible, from which, following the return from Babylon, the Torah was read publicly on market days. The temple was no longer the only institution for Jewish religious life. After the building of the Second Temple in the time of Ezra the scribe, the houses of study and worship remained important secondary institutions in Jewish life. Outside of Judea, the synagogue was often called a house of prayer. While most Jews could not regularly attend the temple service, they could meet at the synagogue for morning, afternoon and evening prayers. On Mondays, Thursdays and Shabbats, a weekly Torah portion was read publicly in the synagogues, following the tradition of public Torah readings instituted by Ezra. Although priests controlled the rituals of the temple, the scribes and sages, later called rabbis, dominated the study of the Torah. These sages maintained an oral tradition that they believed had originated at Mount Sinai alongside the Torah of Moses, a God-given interpretation of the Torah. The Hellenistic period of Jewish history began when Alexander the Great conquered Persia in 332 BCE. The rift between the priests and the sages developed during this time, when Jews faced new political and cultural struggles. After Alexander's death in 323 BCE, Judea was ruled by the Egyptian Hellenic Ptolemies until 198 BCE, when the Syrian Hellenic Seleucid Empire, under Antiochus III, seized control. Then, in 167 BCE, the Seleucid king Antiochus IV invaded Judea, entered the temple, and stripped it of money and ceremonial objects. He imposed a program of forced Hellenization, requiring Jews to abandon their own laws and customs, thus precipitating the Maccabean revolt. Jerusalem was liberated in 165 BCE and the temple was restored. In 141 BCE, an assembly of priests and others affirmed Simon Maccabeus as high priest and leader, in effect establishing the Hasmonean dynasty. The Hasmonean period. Although the Pharisees did not support the wars of expansion of the Hasmoneans and the forced conversions of the Idumeans, the political rift between them became wider when a Pharisee named Eleazar insulted the Hasmonean ethnic John Hyrcanus at his own table, suggesting that he should abandon his role as high priest due to a rumor, probably untrue, that he had been conceived while his mother was a prisoner of war. In response, he distanced himself from the Pharisees. After the death of John Hyrcanus, his younger son Alexander Jannaeus made himself king and openly sided with the Sadducees by adopting their rites in the temple. His actions caused a riot in the temple and led to a brief civil war that ended with a bloody repression of the Pharisees. However, on his deathbed Jannaeus advised his widow, Salome Alexandra, to seek reconciliation with the Pharisees. Her brother was Shimon ben Shetich, a leading Pharisee. Josephus attests that Salome was favorably inclined toward the Pharisees, and that political influence grew tremendously under her reign, especially in the Sanhedrin or Jewish council, which they came to dominate. After her death, her elder son Hyrcanus too sought support from Pharisees, and her younger son, Aristobulus, sought the support of the Sadducees. This culminated in a civil war that ended when the Roman general Pompey intervened and captured Jerusalem in 63 BCE. However, there are some reasons to think that Josephus' account overstates the role of the Pharisees. He reports elsewhere that the Pharisees did not grow to power until the reign of Queen Salome Alexandra, as Josephus was himself a Pharisee. His account might represent a historical creation meant to elevate the status of the Pharisees during the height of the Hasmonean dynasty. Later texts like the Mishnah and the Talmud record a host of rulings by rabbis, some of whom are believed to be from among the Pharisees, concerning sacrifices and other ritual practices in the temple, torts, criminal law, and governance. In the day, the influence of the Pharisees over the lives of the common people was strong and their rulings on Jewish law were deemed authoritative by many. The Roman period. According to Josephus, the Pharisees appeared before Pompey asking him to interfere and restore the old priesthood while abolishing the royalty of the Hasmoneans altogether. Pharisees also opened Jerusalem's gates to the Romans, and actively supported them against the Sadducean faction. When the Romans finally broke the entrance to the Jerusalem's temple, the Pharisees killed the priests who were officiating the temple services on Saturday. They regarded Pompey's defilement of the temple in Jerusalem as a divine punishment of Sadducean misrule. Pompey ended the monarchy in 63 BCE and named Hyrcanus II high priest and ethnic. 6 years later, Hyrcanus was deprived of the remainder of political authority, and ultimate jurisdiction was given to the proconsul of Syria, who ruled through Hyrcanus's Idumean associate Antipater, and later Antipater's two sons Phasael and Herod. In 40 BC, Aristobulus's son Antigonus overthrew Hyrcanus and named himself king and high priest, and Herod fled to Rome. In Rome, Herod sought the support of Mark Antony and Octavian, and secured recognition by the Roman Senate as king, confirming the termination of the Hasmonean dynasty. According to Josephus, Sadducean opposition to Herod led him to treat the Pharisees favorably. Herod was an unpopular ruler, perceived as a Roman puppet. Despite his restoration and expansion of the Second Temple, Herod's notorious treatment of his own family and of the last Hasmoneans further eroded his popularity. According to Josephus, the Pharisees ultimately opposed him and thus fell victims to his bloodthirstiness. The family of Boethius, whom Herod had raised to the high priesthood, revived the spirit of the Sadducees, and thenceforth the Pharisees again had them as antagonists. While it stood, the Second Temple remained the center of Jewish ritual life. According to the Torah, Jews were required to travel to Jerusalem and offer sacrifices at the temple 3 times a year: Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. The Pharisees, like the Sadducees, were politically quiescent, and studied, taught, and worshipped in their own way. At this time, serious theological differences emerged between the Sadducees and Pharisees. The notion that the sacred could exist outside of the temple, a view central to the Essenes, was shared and elevated by the Pharisees.